Today we're going to be learning Ta'anit Daf Kaf Aleph. We're going to start at the top with Ilfa and Rabbi Yochanan. Very famous story. We're going to hear a lot of interesting stories today. We ended with all these stories about walls that were falling down because it was the Mapolet in the Mishnah, about the Av, about something crashing down. And we saw these issues about people who were able to prevent the walls from falling because, like Rav Ada bar Ava, who was a special person, we talked about what was unique about him, what the things he did were. And what we noticed is even Rav and Shmuel weren't great in that way, even though they were the biggest Talmud scholars of their time. And we're going to see similar themes in today's daf. Ilfa v'Rabbi Yochanan havugarsi ba'olaita. Okay, they were sitting learning Torah in yeshiva. Dechika lehu milta, right? If I ask you about Ilfa and Rabbi Yochanan, who have you heard more about? Obviously, Rabbi Yochanan, not Ilfa. But you're going to see from this story that it seems that Ilfa was actually a bigger Talmud scholar or Torah scholar than Rabbi Yochanan was. And yet you'll see from the story why Rabbi Yochanan becomes more famous than Ilfa. Dechika lehu milta tova. Okay, they're having some issues with their, right? They're in poverty. They don't have money. They can't afford to get food, although we'll see they do really have food. So it seems they're not totally in terrible situation, but they do feel like they're not making enough money. So they say to each other, let's go do some business, and we'll support ourselves, right? Let's go out of the Beit Midrash and get a real job. And they quote it from a pasuk, right? They try to justify what they're doing by saying, look, it says in the Torah, there shouldn't be evyonim among you. There shouldn't be poor people. Okay, so that means we have a role to go out and work. So they go and they sit down. We're going to see in a minute, they're going to eat their lunch underneath a wall that was a little bit falling, okay, a weak wall. And they were eating their bread next to this wall. So you see, they weren't totally poor. Two angels come along. Rabbi Yochanan hears one of them saying to the other, let's knock down this wall and kill them, right? This is a good example of when you're in a dangerous place, that's when it's easy for the evil spirits or the angels in this case to get to you because you put yourself in a vulnerable place. That's when usually, right, if you're deserving of death for some reason, it's easy for it to get to you. So they say, oh, here's our opportunity. Let's kill them right now. Why are they deserving of death? They're leaving their rights to the future, right, to the world to come, by dealing with mundane things, by getting a job. In other words, they're leaving the Beit Midrash, big problem. Amar le'idach, the other one says, Shavkinu, leave them alone. There's one of these whose time is going to come, okay, or whose time is ripe. Okay, the assumption is that it means one of these guys is going to become a real huge gadol, okay, a gadol, an important figure, and don't kill them, okay, they have potential. Rabbi Yochanan shama, Ilfa lo shama. So Rabbi Yochanan hears this conversation, Ilfa doesn't hear it. Now this sounds classic, like in those movies where there's a ghost and one person sees the ghost and the other person doesn't, right? And usually in the Gemara, it's usually the inner voices. What's probably going on here is these are the inner voices of Rabbi Yochanan. He has doubts, right? His conscience is bothering him. Maybe this isn't the right thing. Maybe we shouldn't be leaving the Beit Midrash. Ilfa seems to have no issues. He thinks it's very clear where we need to go right now. Rabbi Yochanan is not so sure. Amar Rabbi Yochanan le'ilfa. Shamar marmidi, you hearing things? Amar le'lo, I don't hear anything. Amar, so Rabbi Yochanan says to himself, mideshame ana, ve'ilfa lo shama. The fact that I heard and Ilfa isn't hearing this at all, shma mina ledidi kaima lishata. It must mean that I'm the one who's destined for greatness, because if it weren't me, right, and it's the fact that I'm hearing this must mean that it's me who needs to go back to the Beit Midrash. Now, what's the problem? They already convinced themselves that they don't need to be in the Beit Midrash. They have to deal with their poverty. So what does he do? He brings another pasuk. He says, Amar le Rabbi Yochanan, he says, I'm going to go back and fulfill this other verse. Ki lo yechdal yomi kerev haaretz. There will never be no poor people in the land. It's something that's going to be a constant, right? These two psukim seem to contradict, right? One, sometimes the way to explain it is you have to try not to have yourself be poor, but the fact is there will always be poor people. But Rabbi Yochanan says, look, it's a reality, and I really need to go back to the Beit Midrash because maybe my time has come and I'm going to be a great leader. So, by the way, it's not clear in the story, and this is, I think, a very important fact. it's not clear in the story who is the one. And even though in the end, Rabbi Yochanan does become the leader, it's not clear that that was what the Malachim was referring to. And it could be that had Ilfa decided to stay, he would have been the manhig, the ruler, and the Rosh Hashiva. And we're going to see an allusion to that going on in the story. So what happens? If Ilfa Malach Rabbi Yochanan, by the time Ilfa came back to the Beit Midrash after years of working, already Rabbi Yochanan was king. Okay, right? He wasn't king, but he was head of the yeshiva, and he had reached, right, his height. Amru lo, the people said to Ilfa, I ati mar v'garis lo hava malach mav. Here comes the big line. They said to him, if you had sat and learned and you hadn't left the yeshiva, you would have been the one in charge, okay? You would have made it to this position. And I think that there's a message going on in this story about opportunities and about people taking advantage of opportunities and saying that your destiny is in your hands. And that's what this Masechet's really all about. There's no rain. Don't just sit around doing nothing. Change your actions, change your ways, think about what's wrong, try to shift things, right? That this is all about how people can have effects on their future. Yes, God determines certain things, but within that, we can change those things. Even if God says X amount of rain is going to come, right? It can come stronger, it can come harder, it can come in this place or it can come in that place. There's so much maneuverability and there's so much way for us to influence what's going to be. And that's what the people are saying to him, right? So a little tragic to Ilfa. So what does Ilfa say? Ilfa is a little bit concerned, and I think this is why he does this next thing, that maybe he really is deserving of death. Maybe he made a tragic error. So Azal Tala Nafshe Ba'askalya Desfinata. He goes and hangs himself on the mast of the boat. Amal. He says like this, he gives a challenge. If somebody asked me something from the Braita of Rabbi Chia or Rabbi Yoshaya, okay, this is, the Tosefta is attributed to Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Yoshaya must have had his own book of Tanaitic material. If you ask me something from there, and I can't find you the source for it in the Mishnah, then I'm going to fall from this mast right now and die and drown. So he basically puts them up to the challenge. Not sure how many people were excited to take on this challenge and possibly cause the death of Ilfa, but comes along, Atahu Saba, an elderly gentleman comes along, Tana Le, and he brings him the following Tanaitic source. Ha'omer tnu shekel lebanai b'Shabbat. If somebody is about to die, fascinating, what's he talking about? Someone who's about to die. And here we have Ilfa, who any moment might die. And he says, give a shekel to my sons a week. Okay, I'm about to die. I want every week for you to give my sons a shekel. But the fact is, they really need double the amount of selah to live. A shekel's not enough. So the question is, when the person said, right, imagine there's inflation. Right? He said, give my kids a shekel. So what's a shekel valued at today? Or how far can that go? Or even if right now there was no inflation, but the kids really need more money, can we assume that that was what he meant? So, nutnim lahem selah. We give them what they need, because what he clearly meant was give them what they need to survive. He said shekel, but he really meant whatever they need to live. Right? Notice, by the way, we have a situation where somebody is having trouble living, which was exactly where we started the story. But if he said only give them a shekel, then we only give them a shekel. It depends on your wording. This is like many things in the Gemara. We have to think about what he really meant. Okay, if he said don't give them but a shekel, meaning only a shekel, then clearly he meant even if they need more, I'm not giving them more. Imamal metu yelshu acherim tachtehem. If he said when they die, I want so and so to get the money, assuming they don't have children, right? So give the money to so and so. Ben shamar tnu, ben shamar al titnu. Whether he says give a shekel to my sons, or he says don't give only a shekel to my sons, meaning only a shekel, it doesn't matter. Eino nimlam el shekel. He obviously wanted money to be left over for this other person, so therefore don't give any more than he said. So no matter what language he used in the first part, since he said this, it's obvious that he meant to give them only a shekel. That was what he said. So Amrale answers him, Ilfa, right? You're wondering in suspense, is he going to die or is he going to make it? Ha mane, who is this opinion? Rabbi Meir. This is Rabbi Meir's opinion. Ta'amal mitzvah l'kayem divrei hamet. It's a mitzvah to fulfill whatever a dead person says. Okay, which is very fascinating. What's going on here? Okay, so first of all, he wins, right? He gets it. maybe he's saying, I'm like a dead person, but you should listen to me, right? In other words, I have what to offer. It's true, I didn't sit in the Beit Midrash all those years, but I still have a lot to offer and I still know what I'm doing, which is what he proved to them from the story. Right? Interesting, he feels he has to prove himself, maybe also to himself. Maybe he's all of a sudden, he's conscious, right? He didn't have a conscience in the beginning. He was very clear this is where he needed to go, but he was nervous that maybe he made a mistake, right? It's also interesting, right? Did he make a mistake? Did he, he provided for his family. So it's true he didn't become Rosh Hashiva. This is a little bit of every choice you make, you lose out on other things. And it's not necessarily clear if it was a right or a wrong answer. And you see, he clearly knows his Torah. He must have been learning on the side, right? Even though he wasn't learning in the Beit Midrash. And, the story is left open in terms of it's true, Rabbi Yochanan became the Rosh Hashiva, but it doesn't mean necessarily that was the only right decision to be made. It's like any time people are making big decisions, sometimes all the decisions could be potentially right decisions. There is no necessarily right or wrong decision. Anyway, very interesting story. We're going to move on. Amru alav al Nachum ish Gamzu. We're going to have a lot of stories today. Nachum ish Gamzu, was said about him. Right, we know he's the guy who says Gamzu l'tova, right? Everything is for the good. So hayas suma mishtei enav. He was blind in both eyes. Gidei mishtei adav. Both his hands were cut off. Kitam mishtei raglav. Both his legs were cut off. Kol gufo malei shchin. He was full of boils on his whole body. V'hayam mutal b'bayit when he lived in a house that was falling apart. In order to prevent ants from getting to him, they put the bed in water so that the ants couldn't climb up the legs of the bed. And right, I guess his house was full of ants, and maybe also because his body was corroded a little bit. Or the boils, maybe there was a concern the ants would get to him. Okay, pretty disgusting depiction of what he was like. Okay, whether you read this or not, right, we already know this, okay? So it's in brackets, which means you should read it, but either way, his house was, as we said, with walls that were falling apart. They wanted to immediately take his bed out with him on it, right? He couldn't walk, so they had to carry him out. And then they wanted to take everything else out of the house. He said to them, look, right, why would you take out the bed first? Because save him from the house caving in. First, take out everything in the house, then take my bed out, right? If you remember yesterday, you'll know why. Because I promise you, if I'm living in this house will not fall. So first they take out all the vessels. They trusted him, even though I think they were a little skeptical, which we'll see in a minute. Then they take out his bed, and immediately after what happens, we already configured this out, nafal habayit, the house falls down. Amrulo, Talmidav, his students say to him, Rebbe, if you're such a tzaddik gamur, you're such a special person, and you're such a righteous person, that this happened to you, why do you look like this, right? This reminds us of the Rabbi Yeshua story, that he was so ugly. Why does Torah come in such an ugly vessel? Here it's worse. It's not like you're ugly and you were born that way. Something obviously happened to you. Why did you get terribly punished for? You're such a unique person. Amar lahem, that's why I don't think they believed it before, because only when they saw it did they realize, whoa, something's going on here. So, Amar lahem, he said to them, Banai, ani garamti latzmi, I caused this whole thing to happen. Shapam achat hayiti ma'alech baderech lebeit chami, one day I was walking to my father-in-law's house, I had 3 donkeys with me, one carrying food, one carrying drinks, and one carrying specialty, delicious items. There was a poor person, he said, please give me some food. Wait till I take everything off the donkey. I didn't even have time to start taking things off, or to finish taking things off, and the guy dropped dead right there in front of my eyes. Right? This is a classic case of, he felt totally responsible for the guy's death. Right? This is almost like Rotzach b'shgaga. You murdered someone accidentally, and you have to live with that all your life, right? You didn't intentionally do it. On the other hand, he easily could have saved this guy's life by giving him food. So you can imagine how much guilt he was living with, especially Jewish guilt. So I went and I went on the ground. Right, we see this a lot in our Masechet about people who are falling on the ground praying. And I said, my eyes that didn't have pity on your eyes should be blinded. My hands that didn't didn't have mercy on your hands should be cut off. Raglai shelo chasor raglecha, my legs that didn't have pity on your legs, yitkatu, should be cut off. That wasn't good enough for me. Until I said my whole body should be full of boils. That this is like, be careful what you wish for. But he really got exactly what he wished for. And okay, so that's what he said. We're so sorry for you that this happened to you. He said to them, if I didn't look like this, oy for me. And you can really feel it, right? On the one hand, you think, wow, this is really a miserable life. On the other hand, you get the sense of how else would he have lived with himself? He felt like he had to, right? It's like this, killing someone accidentally or something like that. You live with it for your whole life. It just sits in you. You feel responsible for someone's death. So this was his only way of coping, was to have this go on. And I think we always have this concept in the Gemara that felt like I got my punishment in this world so that in the next world, I'll be okay. Why did they call him Nachum Ish Gamzu? Right now, you could say from this story, he was saying Gamzu l'Tovah. This is for beneficial for me, what's happening. But anything that would happen to him, Amar Gamzu l'Tovah. Okay, now we're going to see a story. Zimna, where really Gamzu l'Tovah. Zimna Chada, Baal Shiduri Yisrael Doron Lebei Kesar. The Jews wanted to give a gift to the emperor. Amru Man Yezal. They said, who's going to be the one to go? Right? It's a little bit of a dangerous job. So Yezal Nachum Ish Gamzu to Melumad B'Nisim. They said, you know what? Nachum Ish Gamzu has a lot of experience with miracles. I'm assuming he didn't look the way he did because he couldn't really travel, and because also you wouldn't want to send someone that looked like that to the king. So the story must have happened beforehand. So, or, also whether these stories really happened is another whole question. And, or they're here just to give us moral lessons. Did they have somewhat of the story truth? Not the whole story. We don't really know exactly. So anyway, what happens? Shadru biyade melos sifted avanim tovodu margaliyot. They send him with a suitcase full of beautiful rocks, gems, okay, and pearls. Azal bat bahu diola. He goes to sleep in a certain inn, a hotel. The people of the inn go into his room. They take out all the jewels and they put in dirt from their, you'll see later in the story, it was dirt from their house, basically, from their grounds. So they fill it up with dirt. He doesn't know the next morning, it's still heavy, and he goes on his way. When he gets there, Sharinu l'sifta. Chazinu demalu afra. So he gives the king this big, he opens his suitcase and it's full of dirt. Okay, so how does the emperor respond? He wanted to kill all the Jews for this. Okay, Amal, he says the Jews are mocking me. They're bringing me dirt. Amar gamzu l'tovah. So Nachum Ish Gamzu says, you know what? Something good will come out of this. Ata Eliyahu. Maybe because Nachum Ish Gamzu said this, and maybe that's why they sent him, because they knew he knew how to handle difficult situations, right? Can you imagine if it was you, you'd be in a panic, right? Here you just did something and you brought down the downfall of the Jewish people. Somebody wants to kill them all. He was calm. He said, it'll work out. And in fact, what happens, comes Eliyahu Hanavi. He comes appearing as one of the officers of the king. And he says, Amarle, Dilmaha Afra me Afra da Abraham Avuhonu. Maybe it's the magical dirt of Avraham Avinu. What magical dirt? When he would throw dirt from the ground, it would turn into swords. Gile, when he threw straw, it turned into arrows. Okay, where do we know this from? Dichtiv, a pasuk in Yeshayahu talks about the Mihir Mizrach Tzedek Yikreu Lechaglo, which they say is referring to Avraham. And then the pasuk continues and says, "Yitain ka'afar charbo," that his dirt will become his swords. Kekash nidaf kashto, and like straw will be his bow, because the arrows will be made of straw. Okay, so here you see Avram had this miraculous thing that's happened this is associated with the war between the 4 kings and the 5 kings, so that he had these magical powers, so to speak, that he could turn dust into swords and turn straws into arrows. Right, it's like having basically ammunition. Right, we always run out of ammunition in a war. He always had, he was able to make ammunition from nothing. So, right? He wants to check it out. Now, we talked yesterday's stuff about this idea that sometimes you have if a mapolet, right, you have to institute fast when something falls down, but it's only if it wasn't going to fall down anyway, because otherwise we don't see it's the hand of God. It's just natural. So he wanted to go fight a war that he knew was going to be hard for him to win, not a war he could easily win, because then it wouldn't prove anything. So what does he say? He says, there's one country that I've never succeeded in conquering. I've tried a number of times or something like that, but I haven't succeeded. So what does he say? He goes to that city. So they check out, does this dust really work? And guess what? They succeed and they conquer the people. So they bring him into the treasure troves of the king. Umaluhu lisifte avanim tovodu margaliot. Right? What does he end up with? Exactly what he started with, which he was supposed to give away, and now they become his. And he sends him back with all these beautiful gems. And he gets sent back with lots of wealth. Kiatu, when he gets back, Bitu Bahu Diola, he goes and sleeps in that same place. Okay, now whether he had no clue what happened and he didn't realize that they messed him up, okay, we don't really know. But he goes back to why he goes to the exact same place, we don't know. But he goes to the exact same place. Right? They expected to never see this guy again. They figured he'd be dead meat. But they see him come back with all these jewels and all this wealth. And they say, what did you give him? So what did he say? Amar lahu, my whatever I took from here, that's what I gave him. Satru the dirayu. So what did these people do? They knocked down their house and amtinu lebe malka, right? They realized that they're living on, it's like imagine finding a gold mine under your house, right? So they're living in a gold mine. They knock down their house. They take all the dirt and they bring it to the emperor. The stuff that guy brought before that was magical, it's from here. Look, we have more of it. But they check the dust. You can imagine where the story is going. They check the dirt and nothing happens. It's got no magical powers. And they kill, right? The emperor kills those people. Okay, so they get their punishment, right? And here's a good Gamzu Latova story. Ezohi Dever. Okay, we're back to the Mishnah now, although we will have more stories today. What is Dever? Irsha Motziah Chamesh Meot Ragli. Remember, when is it considered a plague? Well, there's 500 people, and within that city, there's 3 people that get sick one day after the other. And we said there were 2 different ways of looking at it, and we're going to talk about that right now. Tanu Rabbanan, the Braita says, Ir hamotziah chamesh meot ve'elef ragli. This is 1,500 people, healthy people. Kigon kfar Akko, like for Akko, for example, v'yatzu emenu tish'a meitim b'shlosha yamim, and they have 9 people, right, 3 days in a row. This is exactly triple, right? Everything's triple the numbers before, so it's really in effect the same numbers. Harei zeh dever. B'yom echad, if they all die in one day, ba'arba yamim, or spread out over more days, ein zeh dever. That's not dever anymore. They all die in one day. We just assume it's a fluke, something happened. It's not a plague. A plague is something, right? You think about the R and how many, right, that everyone talks about all the time now, and how many people are sick every day, right? It's something that's continual. It's not something that's continuous. It's not something that just happens once. And it also, right, depending on what the R is, that's what everybody's talking about. This is the same thing, right? How many more new people are getting it daily? It's over 4 days. It's not as bad. Then Ein Zeh Dever. And now it's just saying, okay, that was 1,500. What if there's 500? Kigon Kfar Hamiko, they're giving examples of cities. 3 dead people in 3 days, one after the other. But like we just said, b'yom echad, ba'arba'a yamim, if it's 1 day, or over 4 days, ein zeh dever, then it's not considered dever. Drokart is a city. Ir hamotziah chamesh meot ragli hava. So now we're having a story. We're done with the Braita. We have a story that actually happened. And how many people died? 3 people all in 1 day. Now, according to the Braita, you wouldn't say this is dever, meaning you wouldn't make a fast. But Gazar Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda Ta'anita, he said, let's institute a fast. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Kiman. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak comes and supports him and says, you must be doing like Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir. Ta'amar, and he quotes Rabbi Meir in a totally different topic. This is talking about a short tam and a shor mu'at. If you own an ox and your ox gores someone else, you're responsible for damages. But if he's not known to be a damaging ox, then you pay half damages. But if he's already done it 3 times, then he's known to be a shor mu'at and you have to pay full damages. So now Rabbi Meir says, if they're separated from each other. How many times, the 3 times that he gored someone, you're liable. So obviously if kirev, if he did them one right after the other, of course he's super dangerous and therefore you're going to be fully responsible. So now he says same thing here. If they die in 3 days and yet they die in 1 day, of course, dying 1 day is worse. So yes, we're going to make a fast for them. So the important thing to notice here is that Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, 2 things to notice. First of all, the first Rav Nachman is Rav Nachman, the son of Rav Chisda. He's the son of a rabbi. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is just the son of Yitzchak, not a rabbi. We're going to get to that later. And the thing to note is that Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak gives a source for Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda did. So because of that, Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda is kind of impressed with him. And Amalei Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Le Kumar, Le Tekabam, why don't you come and move and live with us? Because, right, we have like a city full of Talmidei Chachamim. You're living in a place, it's just you, it's not, you'll have more respect by us. Amarle, Tanina, he says to him, look, it says in a Braita, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Lo mekomo shel adam mechabdo, ela adam mechabed et mekomo. It's not the place that makes a person respectful, it's the person. I'll be respected wherever I am. If I'm going to be a respected person, I'm going to be respected here, I'll be respected there. It doesn't matter to me if I'm living in a place where there's more respectable people. It's not connected. The place has no significance whatsoever. Shekem matzinu b'Har Sinai, here he proves it, on Har Sinai. When the Shekhinah, God's presence was there, the Torah said, no, even animals can't go up on the mountain because the place was holy. But once God's presence was gone, as soon as we sound the shofar, God's presence will leave and everyone can go up the mountain. So what do you see? It was only when God's presence was there. It has nothing to do with the location. And furthermore, same thing with the Oel Moed that was in the desert, the Mishkan. When it was up, right, and Zavim, all those people have to leave the camp. It's holy. But when they roll up the parochet, everyone can now go in there in the space where the Mishkan used to be, because there's no sanctity to the space once God's presence isn't there. Amarle, so Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda says, come live by us. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, no thanks. So you can see he's not willing to give up. Amarle, well then maybe we should go live by you, or I'll go live by you because I want to live near you. Amarle, it seems like Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak didn't really want Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda living with him. We're not really sure why, but he's got another retort. Mutav yavo maneh ben pras, etzel maneh ben maneh. Better the person who's worth 100, the son of someone who's only worth 50, should go live by the person who's worth 100, the son of someone worth 100. But al yavo maneh ben maneh, etzel maneh ben pras. But the person who's worth 100 and whose father was worth 100 shouldn't go live by the person who's worth 100 and his father's only worth 50, which basically means I'm Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. My father wasn't a rabbi. Why would you want to move to someone whose father wasn't a rabbi? You want to stay in a place. You're the son of a rabbi. You've got it all. You don't need me. Okay. I'm less worthy than you, so don't come live near me. Now, whether he was just trying to push him off or whether there's really something to be said for this, because on the one hand, he said, don't go live with other people, right? It's all about you. But then he's saying, well, it also depends on who your father was. It's a little bit tricky to understand what message he's trying to get across. Okay. New story. B'Zura Hava Divrata. There was a plague of Dever. Okay. There was a plague. But specifically in the neighborhood, okay, Rav lived in Surah, but in his neighborhood of Surah, there was no Dever. There was no plague. Savrumine, so what did everybody think? Mishum schute de Rav, de Nafish, right? Rav has a lot of merits. They figured it must be because of him that in his neighborhood there wasn't the Dever, the plague. But then everybody saw in a dream, de Rav de Nafish schute tuva, hamel de zutre le Rav. They were told in a dream, these merits of Rav, they're too big for this. They don't use merits of Ravs for things like this. Okay, now we talked about this before. It's not the Talmidei Chachamim that we're looking for, and this is exactly the story that's going to prove it. Now here, they seem to be justifying and saying, well, it's because his merits are too great. But I think also it has to do with the Rabbi Yochanan story. He, in the end, stays in the Beit Midrash, and he's a man of Beit Midrash. His world is Beit Midrash. That's why I think when we had the story, you see, first of all, there's all these negative stories of Rabbi Yochanan in our Masechet, right? We saw the story of his sister was scared he was going to kill the son, right? And there were some other things of Rabbi Yochanan that were a little bit questionable. And It seems here that they're saying he was a little out of touch with people and what's going on outside the Beit Midrash. So maybe it's also just their merits are great, but they don't connect to these. These are issues, mundane, everyday, real issues. You need someone who's in touch with the reality and who's connected with it, and we'll see what kind of person you need to be able to save the people. So what else did they see in the dream? There was a guy who basically lent people the shovel and all the utensils that they needed to bury people. He's the guy, because of him. He saved the people from, it's interesting, right? It was midah keneged midah. Right? It was exactly appropriate. He helped people with their burial, and they were saved that they didn't need to bury people. B'Dorokat have a delekta. Okay, another similar story. In the city of Dorokat, there was a fire. Ubeshivavute de Rav Huna, but in his neighborhood, lo have a delekata. The fire didn't come to him, his neighborhood. Savor mine b'schuta de Rav Huna de nafish. We assume, look, Rav Huna has lots of schuyot. We already saw in the previous daf that while he does have lots of schuyot, in the end, he wasn't the one who could keep the house from standing. It was Rav Ada bar Ava. So similarly here, Savor mine b'schuta de Rav Huna de nafish. They thought it was because of him. And again, itchazilu b'chalma, they saw in a dream, Hi zutra Rav Huna. This is too little for Rav Huna. And the mishum hahi itita. It's because of a woman. Okay, here we see a woman gets schuyot. It's her merits. What did she do? The mechama matanura. Some versions have me'erev Shabbat le'erev Shabbat. She would keep her fire lit in the oven from Friday to Friday, meaning all week long. And she would loan it out to people in her neighborhood. So that's right. You see here, these are the people that are helping. They're just simple people. But what are they doing? They're making sure that people have a way to bury, that people have food to eat, right? The basic needs of humans. And they're taking care of that. And because of that, they get saved. They're able to save other people in their city. Amru le Rav Huna, le Rav Yehuda. They said to Rav Yehuda, Atu kamse. There's locusts coming. Gazar ta'anita. So he said, let's do a fast. Amrule, lo kamafsidan. Well, they're not doing anything. We didn't really want to get a fast out of this. We want to eat. They said, what are you doing? But they're not eating anything yet. Amar lehu, zavda aitu ba'adai. What did they bring? Right, zavda, like the Hebrew word mizvada, is a luggage. Do they bring stuff with them? Do they have food with them? No. If they don't have food with them, what are they going to do? They're going to eat our food. So it's true today, they might not be eating our stuff, but by tomorrow, the next day, they're going to be eating all of our fields. Another story. They said to Rav Huna, there's a plague. There's a plague among the pigs. Okay, now I'm assuming the Jews didn't raise pigs, so maybe it was around Gentiles' pigs. This reminds me of swine flu. Okay, this is the page of infectious diseases for sure. Okay, so Gazar ta'anita, he makes a fast. Does he hold that a disease that plagues one type is going to basically go to another type, right? Again, infectious diseases, right? Like COVID that came from a bat, that anything can get from anything to anywhere. So they say no. Their intestines are like human intestines, which means things that get them sick will get humans sick. It doesn't mean it's going to get everything sick. I'm thinking of swine flu, really, in this, right? But they will get people sick. Amrulei the Shmuel, Ika Motana Bechozai. Said there's a plague going on in Bechozai, which was not so close to him. Gazar Ta'anita, he made a fast anyway. Amrulei Vahamarachak. They said, but it's far from here. There's no river that basically prevents something from getting over to the other side of the river, which means we're connected by land, which means basically this is going to get to us as well. They said to Rav Nachman in Israel. Now that's already much, much farther, much less people traveling from there, right? Obviously before there were airplanes. And as we know, certainly in the beginning, COVID was basically getting around from, people traveling long distances and bringing it. But he says, right, in Israel, Gazar ta'anita, he says we have to fast. So now Amar im gvira loka, he said, look, if the queen is sick, then shipcha lo koshken, obviously her attendants are going to get sick. So if in Israel they're sick, we're going to get it in Babylonia as well. Tama digvira v'shipcha, from here you can infer what though? Only if it's that kind of relationship. Aval shipcha v'shipcha, if it's two on the same level, low, it wouldn't be. But that doesn't make sense because Amrulei the Shmuel. They said to Shmuel, right? There's a plague in Bechozai, and it was far away, and it was the same level, and Gazar Ta'anita. So why? He presumably didn't need to. To which the Gemara answers, there they have caravans going back and forth. So that's why that was a danger from Beit Hozai to where he was living, but not from Israel to here. That's already much less common that people don't travel, and it's only because of the direction of the relationship. Okay, last story for today. Abba Umana, again, fitting in with our theme of certain people are unique people in terms of their community people and the way they're helping others, and that gives them merits that even the rabbis, the great rabbis, don't have. So we have Rav and Shmuel, Rav Huna, now we're getting to Shmuel, Abaye and Rava, who are also one of the great Talmud scholars. So now the Gemara says, Abba Umana, okay, his name was Abba, he was an Uman. That's someone who bloodlets. That was like their doctors of those days. Hava atele shlama mimitiv to derikia kol yoma. Okay, obviously, you have to understand this, not exactly literally. He would basically get what we call a drishat shalom. He would get a hello from God every day. Okay, some sort of message from God daily. He was in direct communication with him in some way. Abaye komali yoma deshabt. Abaye would only get this every Friday afternoon. And the Rabba komali yoma de kippur. For Rava, it was every Erev Yom Kippur. Okay, so you have this hierarchy of who's greater than who. Rava's obviously at the bottom, Abaye above him, and right, Rava's still better than the average person, but not as good as Abaye, and Abaye is not as good as Abba Umna. So, have a kachal shadate d'Abaye mishum d'Abba Umana. Abaye felt pretty bad. He said, I'm a pretty good guy. I try very hard. I do all sorts of things. Why don't I have the same merits as he does? Sorry, but you're not doing actions like he does. Okay, you're not a man of big actions. What did he do? So first of all, he separated men and women for tzniut reasons, right? He was a doctor. He made sure to always have them separate. Okay, he basically had this special, okay, you think about, he had special cloak or a shirt that he would give to the women when he did the bloodletting. What was unique about the shirt, right? You go to do a blood test or a vaccine, you have to pick up your shirt, right? You want to have the women pick up their shirts. So what did he do? And I think about these special robes they make for women having to go to the mikveh for conversion, where they have to go in front of other people. And they make these robes, right? Normally a robe will just fly right up and it's really inappropriate. So they make these robes that are kind of sealed at the bottom that they don't ride up. So here he made this special cloak so that he could bloodlet, right? Get the blood out without. So what was it? It had this keren, it had this reed that was kind of going through. It had a hole. Okay, it had a bezia bekuslita. It had a hole on the side, exactly in the place where he would need to bloodlet. And he would put this tube in, and he would take the blood from there without having to have them remove their shirts. Right? When the woman would come, we give it to her to wear. So you wouldn't have to look at her. And obviously also it kept the women feeling comfortable, right? That they didn't have to start taking off their shirts. He had a private place, where people would put their money when they paid for him. He didn't have a secretary collecting money and charging them when they would leave. He put out a box there, whoever had money would put money, and whoever didn't put money and wasn't embarrassed because nobody knew who put money, who didn't. When Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars would come, he wouldn't accept any money from them. When they would leave, he would give them money and he would say to them, Zil bari nafsha, go take care of yourself, go buy some food, you'll feel better this way. Because obviously they were coming to him, they were sick, and he said, you're not eating enough. One day, Abaye said, I'm going to send a pair of people to check out this guy. Okay, this is, and Abaye was jealous of him. And he said, you know what? Sometimes these people look perfect, right? We all know this. There's people who look so amazing. And then you find out all these bad things about them that deep down, they're really not, right? This unfortunately happens in the news a lot, right? You see about these people who are great leaders, and it turns out they're using their charisma to do inappropriate things, all sorts, take advantage of people. So I want to check out, is this guy really legit? So he sends a pair of rabbis to kind of check out what the story is. So we're going to stop here for now, continue the story tomorrow, and see whether he stands up to the test or not. So with that, I'll wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and we will pick up here from here on Shabbat stuff. Have a great day.